Welcome to Comics Oddities. My name is Eric, and today we're going to talk about your 20s. It's a time of thin wallets, ramen noodle diets, and maybe, self-discovery. Living on your own for the first time. Maybe even first serious relationships. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, what about high school for that? But let's be honest, if you're reading comics, probably didn't happen to you till way later. So here is my 7 best comics for enduring your 20s. These are in no particular order, but if you stick around to the end, I'll share with you my favorite comic for enduring your 20s. Now, hopefully this will give you a good list of books to read. I will mention this is only alternative comics, no superhero, sci-fi stuff. Some of these might have fantasy elements, but for the most part, they're all kind of have to deal with the theme of being in your 20s, living on your own for the first time. So, let's dive deep into my list of best comics for your 20s. Okay, now first on my list, we have Boys Club by Matt Fury. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Oh, there's Pepe the Frog. The alt-right. Am I going to become some sort of Nazi after reading this? Well, no. That's a whole different, separate issue. And let's just get Pepe the Frog, at it. Just read that without having that in your mind, because that kind of has nothing to do. The whole 4chan culture kind of hijacked this character. Watch Feels Good Man. So anyway, Boys Club, it's about these 4 guys who live together as roommates in this sort of kind of post-college era. And they're often pulling pranks on each other, making dick and fart jokes. And there's also kind of some weird surreal elements to it. There's a talking marijuana leaf. This is from the 2000s, and I believe he started publishing these on MySpace, so there's a lot of that kind of early 2000s humor to it. The art in this is very charming and kind of iconic and original, and it's very funny at times. This is actually kind of has 2 separate books within one. It starts out with all these little gag kind of 4-panel comics with these characters, and then at the end of the book there's one long story. I actually prefer the longer story to the gags. It's really funny and crazy. This character, Landwolf, takes the world's longest shit in the toilet, and he texts Pepe the Frog, and he's like, "Pepe just laid the longest log, come over." And Pepe is like, "Nope." But then Pepe goes over there and he's his mind is blown by how long this shit is, and it makes a figure 8 in the toilet bowl. So they run over to one of the other roommates and they're like, "Hey, can I borrow your camera? I just made the biggest shit in the universe." And this is before smartphones, so they have to have an actual camera, but the camera's out of batteries, so he's like, "Oh no." So they take the shit, wrap it in paper, and stick it in the refrigerator. And one of the characters thinks it's some sort of salami or something, so he almost eats it. So this is the kind of humor you're gonna get with it. It's kind of college, gross out kind of bro-y humor. But if you're into that thing, definitely check that out, and give Boys Club a try. Don't let Pepe knock you off from reading Boys Club. Second on the list, we have the Scott Pilgrim series by Brian Lee O'Malley. I'm holding right now the first book, but there's multiple books of these, and you can actually get them in one giant collection. This one's gonna be more popular and well known because there was a movie made out of this, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, directed by Edgar Wright. Really good director, great movie, but I think the books are actually better and they're very addictive. Now I know this can be somewhat controversial in the modern era just because he's dating a high schooler in the beginning, which is kind of creepy. Then he has to fight off his girlfriend's exes, which is kind of a toxic mindset if you think about it. But I will say this comic is very well written, very funny. It's very good at grabbing your attention throughout the read. It's just addicting. You just fly through each book. It has to do with, of course, Scott Pilgrim, who is this kind of young 20s slacker, he's kind of an idiot, but like a lovable idiot. And he has these dreams of this beautiful girl with pink hair and roller skates, and then he ends up meeting her in real life, Ramona Flowers. But in order to be with her, he has to fight off her 7 evil exes. So there's this kind of like fantasy superhero anime. There's a lot of anime influence in this aspect, mixed with being in your 20s, having a crazy roommate, being in a band. So yeah, that's Scott Pilgrim. If you haven't read the books but watched the movie and you love the movie, just don't be a hypocrite and just read the books. Now, to get away from the broiness in my last couple comics, we have Eye of the Majestic Creature by Leslie Stein. This is an autobio comic about Leslie, the author, and she's in her 20s in a band. But like I said, there's a lot of fantasy elements in this as well. Like she's friends with her guitar, and there's like a talking flower person at some point, and yeah, a lot of different. There's like a talking sentient metronome. The art in this is really amazing. There's a lot of stippling and just beautifully rendered. And if you're familiar with Leslie Stein's later work, which I was before finding this, it's kind of interesting to see how her unique kind of iconic style develops. Her later works, she has a lot of kind of dotted-eyed characters with their like half of their faces kind of missing, and it's all in watercolor, which sounds really strange, but it works really well and it like really stands out. However, I do feel that the story in this is lacking compared to the art. I think the art's amazing, but for whatever reason, the story couldn't really grab me that much. Now, I do have the second volume of this. I need to go pick up the first one, then maybe I'll have a better understanding of what's going on, but that's my personal opinion. However, I do think this is a great comic, so that being said. Next we have Megahex by Simon Hanselman. Simon Hanselman, probably the biggest kind of well-known alternative cartoonist at the moment. Definitely hot. This is part of the Meg, Mog, and Owl series. He has several books with these characters. This is the first one, so if you want to start reading them, if you haven't picked them up before, definitely start with this one. You can definitely see like a big progression within the comic when you start reading it. It has to deal with Meg, Mog, and their roommate Owl. Meg is this witch character, who's just this cool, crazy witch chick, and her boyfriend Mog, who is literally a cat, which makes some very awkward, weird sex scenes occasionally. And then they're kind of straight-laced, nerdy roommate Owl, who they're constantly pulling pranks on. And then there's also another character, Werewolf Jones, who's like the crazy party animal, whacked out kind of guy. You know, he like puts a cheese grater to his balls to get attention. That kind of guy. These comics, especially this one, aren't very plot heavy. It's kind of just meanders around from just these characters smoking weed, living together, pulling pranks on each other, just hanging out. It's a hangout kind of comic, which I think is nice. Like sometimes it's good to get away from like very plot heavy media and just have something to chill out with. But this comic especially, I think, is very indicative of the 20s lifestyle. Just roommates hanging out, smoking weed. They don't have any serious career ambitions and just kind of pulling pranks on each other. Alright, next we have Angeloid by Alex Graham. Now, Alex Graham is better known for her Dog Biscuits book. That's more of a COVID-19 drama. This definitely kind of more has an auto-bio feel to it, even though it isn't actually auto-bio. Kind of has to do with this young, eccentric artist character who has her own insecurities and problems fitting in with society and being a girly girl, and she's living on her own for the first time. She's working at a Greek restaurant, and she has this dilemma where she has to kind of leave out an aspect of herself to become this girly girl who fits in more. There's a lot of fantasy elements in this. There's like beings from other worlds. The main character, Angeloid, actually hooks up with a toaster-headed woman at one point, and she's actually like, plug me into the wall, just plug me in, plug me in. It's really crazy and goofy. A lot of relatable aspects to it, but then also that kind of otherworldliness that we all love. So yeah, so the main character, Angeloid, kind of changes her image and from this kind of tomboy to this girly girl, and she ends up getting in this serious relationship with this guy she really likes. So there's this dilemma of like, does he really like me for me, or does it just like me because I've changed myself into this girly girl with cute eyelashes and blah blah blah. There's a lot of this, especially if you're an artist, that is very relatable, that really, you know, hits the heartstrings. It's a great addictive read. And also, let's not forget to mention this beautiful cover done with like clay models, and in the back there's like this, they're like smushed up. But yeah, it's really cool, very punk rock, very autobile with fantasy elements. Alright, and then we have Fanny Bakowski by Noah Van Sciver. This is actually the complete Fanny Bakowski. It's all 3 books collected in one big book of biblical proportions. So this comic has to deal with this naive, misfit writer who changes his name to Fanny Bakowski after John Fante and Charles Bukowski. He's this amazing, genius, brilliant writer, but he's actually pretty terrible at it, and he's naive. He's living in seedy motel to seedy motel, and he's getting his parents to pay for the rent. If you're an artist, this comic will really hit home to you. I remember myself when I was in my early 20s, I thought I was going to be this amazing, fantastic cartoonist, but looking back, the stuff I made back then was pretty awful, and I was kind of naive to think that I was good. But this comic is really funny and addicting. It doesn't have a heavy plot to it, but it kind of has some sort of mini plots that kind of tie things together. Fanny Bakowski is this very kind of lovable idiot. He's the kind of guy you kind of love to hate. He does a lot of dumb things, but you learn to love him more and more as this comic goes on. He has this kind of brief romance with this other poet, a writer, who ends up becoming very famous and like a New York Times bestseller, but she's still obsessed with him and goes back to find him. There's a lot of hilarious moments of this, of just Fanny Bakowski going up to publishers to try to get him published, and they're just like, you're a complete idiot, and him going into like a FedEx at like 6 at night trying to print like 1,000 copies of his zine, and they just like hassling minimum wage workers to get this zine out, which is terrible. They even actually have the actual zine printed in the back of the book, and you can read it with just like really bad, dumb poetry. Noah Van Sciver himself makes an appearance in this book. It's kind of a depressing, cynical, self-loathing appearance, but he's in there. This book, although it could seem a little dark and self-loathing at times, it also has its funny, crazy moments to it. Definitely worth checking out. The art is beautiful, a lot of watercolors, and kind of like there's like a, I think, crayon in there as well. Yeah, Fanny Bakowski, character you love to hate. And speaking of hate, we have Hate Comics by Pete Bagge. This is Buddy Does Seattle. This is like a collection of hate comics from 1990 to 1994. This is my best comic for people enduring their 20s. Reading this comic made me want to move to the Pacific Northwest. This comic stars Buddy Bradley. He's kind of this loudmouth, slacker, scruffy character who moves to Seattle with 2 roommates, one of them being Stinky, who is this complete mess of a human being. He's always getting himself into trouble and doing these crazy money-making schemes that go nowhere. He even starts like some sort of Red Hot Chili Peppers-esque band at one point that actually kind of becomes famous. But yeah, this book is kind of sort of like a diary that goes through Buddy Bradley's life living in his 20s in Seattle. It entails his relationship with this very woke, proud feminist woman who works at a feminist bookstore, which doesn't end too well being Buddy Bradley, this kind of like loudmouth, grouchy, angry person who, again, he kind of makes decisions sometimes that you're like, don't do that, but you kind of love to hate him, and you keep going, you empathize him with, but you also think of him as this idiot, and it grabs you in. I will say this comic, it's very funny, very witty. It's insane that one person is writing this whole thing, and the art has this like beautiful noodly kind of wonky off-center style to it. It also entails Buddy's relationship with Lisa, who is this kind of just crazy, offbeat character. At one point, Buddy and Lisa break up, and Lisa shaves her head and puts on nothing but a potato sack and confesses her love for Buddy. It's really crazy, really insane. I know there's a lot of like truthful elements that are in this book, but also kind of wise tale, exaggeratedness. So a lot of this actually entails a lot of Pete Bagge's actual life in it. The cool thing about this comic, it is actually kind of a period piece too. This takes place in the early 90s in Seattle, where the alternative grunge rock scene was kind of taking place and at its height. So this was like a really popular comic at the time because it kind of summed up that whole 90s slacker alternative rock aesthetic as bestly as possible. The funny thing is, most of this stuff actually happened 10 years before that whole scene took off. And the funny thing is, the author, Pete Bagge, actually hated grunge music, and he actually makes fun of it on several occasions throughout this book. There's like a band of everybody in the band is like, they're 20 years old, they have like greasy, shaggy hair, and they're all named Kurt for whatever reason, and they're just very ridiculous. Like one of them's like, I gotta quit the band, I got my girlfriend pregnant, I have to go back to college now, and it's just crazy. Buddy Bradley is the kind of guy who always gets himself into trouble. He says the wrong things the wrong time, and then his dynamic with Stinky, who's this kind of rapscallion, slimy, schemy kind of idiot, is a pretty good dynamic. So yeah, definitely if you're looking for a comic that embodies being in your 20s, and if you're looking for a comic that kind of has that early 90s alternative rock aesthetic, definitely read Hate. I recommend picking up the volumes, and if you go back, you can actually read Neat Stuff, which is the comic before this, where it's Buddy Bradley in high school. And then through further volumes, Buddy Bradley has a family of his own and has like an eye patch, and he becomes bald, and he like works at a junkyard. I love Hate. Hate's the best. So that's it. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and sticking to the end. Tell me what you think. If you have any other recommendations for comics about people living in their 20s, put them in the comments. I know some of you might be pissed off that I didn't do any superhero, Marvel, DC kind of stuff. I will say, if you're expecting that, this channel is probably not for you. But for that, I will say adios, farewell, eat your vegetables and get plenty of exercise. Have a great day.
I drove a train into the Eiffel Tower. I turned around and went to Tennessee. I searched the globe for the perfect flavor, but nothing out there really did it for me.